Okay, welcome everyone to the live podcast, Win More on Purpose. Today we have Shayna Karen with us on I Never Signed Up to Be a Salesperson, How to Sell as a Business Owner, Coach, and Freelancer. The agenda, for those of us who don't know, it's going to be more conversational. We're here learning together. Write down those questions. There is going to be a Q&A at the end, and there will be a recording for those who need to jump out early. As just starting off, everyone could just put into the chat where you're coming in from, what it is that you're working on in your business right now, maybe just a question you might have for us at the end. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Yaakov Steinberg. I'm a sales coach. When I first went into the coaching space about 4.5+ years ago now, I noticed really quickly people were able to build a 6-7-figure business on their own. They're good at what they do. They're passionate. Some point along the way, they learned how to speak to people, but they'd hit a glass ceiling, either because they were making it up as they went along or because they didn't want to be that quintessential used car salesperson, sleazy, pushy, which is a big part of what we're going to talk about here today. And that's kind of where I came to the picture. Mindset, techniques, skills, just helping people to get that confidence and clarity to take their business to the next level, knowing who they need to speak to, where they're going to find them, what to say, how to say it. I've had the pleasure of working with quite a number of people on LinkedIn, whether it be Chaya Fishman, Hoodie Bloch, Hoodie Greenberger, just to name a few. And thank God the companies that have been able to work with me have been able to grow at the 6-7-figure level by even 50% in the first 60 days, at the 100K mark, give or take, even 150% in the first 60 to 90 days. And at just solopreneurs starting out, even at 4K, 200, 240% in the first 45 days. Ms. Karen, it's really a pleasure to have you here today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and let's get into it.
Amazing. Yeah. So I think I actually got introduced to you through Chaya Fishman originally back about 4 years ago. Makes sense.
Long time ago.
Yeah, I do career consulting, and I think that I'm seeing a lot of friends here in the audience. So I think most people here, we've been connected, been in touch. Some of you even, on a more personal basis. We've met. So I think most of you know what I do. It's just really helping people figure out what are their best skills and how to, for most people, make the most successful career, which for most people is monetized in on, like, cash in on your best skills and the things that you enjoy doing most.
Amazing. Whenever we've had this conversation before we got to the podcast, which is how we ended up here. And anytime that we've ever discussed the idea of coaching and things like that, there's a lot of questions that ended up coming up, which kind of led to this podcast. I think the first question I would want to start with is this concept that people have where they believe that sales is something you're born with. It's a skill that you automatically have, and it's not a learned skill. What do you believe about that?
Oh, it's such a good question. I think there are so many right answers. So I'll tell you what I'm thinking right now. I think that sales, there are some people who we all know who, if they go to a certain store, everyone's going to hear about it and everyone's going to need to try this new ice cream or, bakery or product or, whatever, mattress cover, like whatever it is that they've done. And they're the kind of people who just are natural salespeople. Now, what's interesting is sometimes those people don't think of themselves as salespeople. Like if you would say, oh, you should sell that product, they would like freeze, right? And they would be like, oh, no, like not for money. And like people suddenly get very weird when it comes to like I should make money off of something, right? As if like money was something that like somehow paints or dirties or ruins the relationship or like with the thing or with the person, So I think that like there are some kids who you see them hustling in 4th grade with those, things, Snapples in the hallway and, sneaking in, whatever. But then there are plenty of us, I think, who turned into entrepreneurs or salespeople, even though we were the last people that you would think would be salespeople, but because there's something that we really care about. So sometimes it's like a nonprofit and someone becomes a fundraiser. And it's like they hate asking people for money. They would never take money for themselves, but they love the thing that they're changing in the world so much that they become a major fundraiser, right? I think like we all know Sarifka Cohen, and like I don't think she loves fundraising, but she does a really good job of it because she's obviously so passionate. So she would be an example of someone like that. And then you have the people who are kind of like me. I never thought of myself as a salesperson. I really wanted to be a career coach, and so I'm passionate about the thing that I do. And then it's like, oh, if you want to be able to help people, you better be able to sell. And then you start like realizing, is it worth becoming a salesperson, that thing that we think of as very dirty, to be able to do the thing that I want to do to make a difference in the world? And usually, hopefully, the answer is yes. And then you go and learn some skills and realize that it's not dirty at all.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we talk about this all the time on this podcast for sure, about this idea that really sales is being of service. You're not really trying to sell anybody. Nobody wants to be sold to, although many of us want to buy. Right. So ultimately, when we come from this thought process of being of service and really wanting to be there for others, which is that passion that you're talking about, so then it enables us to have the wherewithal to go and be that salesperson we need to be to help others get what they need. As a sales coach, I mean, I see this all the time where so many of the clients that I have are people that never thought of themselves as a salesperson. And all of a sudden, one day they woke up and realized, I need to sell this to people. And so, like, they just want to be a graphic designer or a web developer. They don't even want to talk to people. But ultimately, they get, the only way to give your services to anybody and to serve anybody is to talk to them about it.
Yeah, when people tell me that, like, I just want to be a this or a that, and they also just want to work for themselves. So I always say, well, if you go and work for yourself, you need to recognize from the outset that 50% of your time is going to be running the business and selling the thing. Right. And so if you're not ready to do that, don't take a job. Like, not everyone needs to be a salesperson, but every business owner, freelancer does need to be a salesperson.
100%. One of the things I think as a career coach that you can help us with is everyone has their natural personality. And one of the things that a lot of people feel, and we're going to get to the introverted question next, but one of the things that people feel when it comes to their personality, they don't want to feel sleazy, cheap, uncomfortable, hands down. Nobody wants to feel that way. How can someone sell using their natural personality so they don't feel that way?
You are speaking my language. So, so
I try.
personality, when you say personality, I know you just mean a general thing, but I'm going to take that literally. Okay.
Go
So,
for it.
so when you
I
say
thought you might run with
personality,
this one.
oh, okay. So when you say personality, I'm like actually breaking it down to the science of what's personality, right? So for those of you who've done a personality Myers-Briggs, 16 personalities, you'll know what I'm talking about. For those of you who didn't, wait till we're done and then go on my website. There's a free quiz and you can find out what your personality type is and get a whole report with all kinds of good information for you, your family, your spouse, your friends. So anyway, so when we talk about, like you said, we'll touch on introversion and extroversion next. So I'll use, that as one part. So one part of there's 4 categories that we divide up personality. So one of them is do you get energy from being with people, or do you not, or do you get energy from being alone, right? Another one of them is, do you make decisions first with your heart or first with your head? Are you the kind of person who likes to plan in advance or is very spontaneous, right? So I think that the crux of the issue that people have with sales, when they say, oh, I don't have a sales personality, it is true that if you want to take the perfect sales personality, we can choose one. It's someone who's extroverted. It's someone who is down to earth, so they're very aware of their surroundings. It's someone who's like a feeler, like emotional, so they get excited, they get passionate, they can sell other people on that passion. And someone who's very spontaneous, like no matter what situation you put them in, what things change, they didn't plan for this meeting, they can get up and speak about the thing that they're excited to sell. So those people are called ESFPs, and they are the classic salespeople. And if someone's an ESFP, they're what we call the boring salesperson. My husband is an ESFP. He didn't need my advice. He naturally became a salesperson. So, but then we have all the other 15 types, right? Like I have all the opposite letters. I'm the opposite personality. And still, if you think about what I do, besides for career coaching, I sell my service because that's the other half of the business. So the trick is to not try to sell like the classic salesperson, because you will fail 100%. Like you are guaranteed to fail trying to be someone else, right? So the way that I try to sell is maybe by not following a script or not following a specific conversation, right? And it's like really going into your personality. You're a more logical thinker. You're going to do better using logic, right? You're more introverted, so don't sell to a crowd, right? So it's like there's a method that works for every single personality, and no personality really can say that, oh, my personality type is just not a salesperson.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because at the end of the day, one of the things that I mean, I talk about all the time is please don't be the stereotypical salesperson, right? None of us want to come anywhere near those people, right? They're just pushing things and selling things to people that they don't even need. Now, what we do want to do is, as I mentioned earlier, is being of service. And a lot of times we can do that. And I'm going to hold off on the whole introverted piece of it because what I'm going to say might shock some people here. But it's about realizing what is it that works for us, right? There's a toolbox of different strategies that are out there. A lot of them we try to cover on this podcast where people can build their own approach, right? It's about believing in your product, listening and not hearing. The difference being when you hear, it goes in one ear and out the other. Listening, it takes a pit stop in the middle, and you actually process the information. It's about understanding how to build trust and not being afraid to be honest that it might be not the right fit for them, or giving them some tough love or telling them something that they might not want to hear. And in doing those things, you're giving more than you're taking. You're able to really create experiences for people and be there for them, right? So a lot of times people, they fall into this hole where it's like, well, I can't be a regular salesperson, therefore I can't. I love the answer you gave, which was you can, you just need to figure out what works best for you and your specific personality.
Yeah, I mean, I had a really interesting comment from a client this morning in a session, and it was like, it reminded me that doing what's like completely authentic and honest, what you think is going to be the opposite of selling always sells. So she told me, she said, when I spoke to you, you didn't say, I have the perfect solution. Oh, I have a system that's going to work for you. I told her, I said, listen, I'm not really sure exactly how we're going to solve this problem, but I think if we work together, put our heads together, I think we'll figure something out. But I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. And she was like,
right.
If you would have told me anything else, I would have been like, no, not my person. And I'm like, that's so funny. Like, you would think that's the worst thing to tell a potential client, right?
Yeah, 100%. But in reality, when we say listen, I don't know, but I'm happy to try, they trust you so much more because you're actually willing to be honest and authentic to who you are. It takes us right into this introverted extroverted conversation, which I'm really excited about. I am an introvert, which most people would never believe.
That's
I believe I'm an
shocking.
INSP. Now, that being said, most people believe that if you're an introvert, you can't sell, right? I happen to know quite a number of really top salespeople that are introverts. So what would be your advice to people who feel like they're introverted and therefore they should leave the selling to people who have a personality?
Oh my gosh, yes, yes. I mean, it's like so funny that we say like a personality as like having one or not having one. Everybody has one. We say when we say has a personality, we mean has an extroverted personality, right?
Exactly.
It's like kind of became like when you say a Kleenex, it means a tissue, right? Like we have this weird association. So I think first of all, like even you saying that you're an introvert surprises me, which reminds me to never make an assumption about a person's personality, because lots of people who only know me publicly and don't know me in my personal life also think that I'm an extrovert, because oh, when you go to networking events, you're so friendly and you love talking to people and you look like you're having a good time. And that is completely true. What you don't know is that when I come home, I need a full 2 hours on the couch alone reading a book to decompress from that. And probably for the next 24 hours, I really won't want to talk to a lot of people, right?
Right.
So the introvert, what it means is, hang on, sorry, here's my battery going on me. When it was fully charged 20 minutes ago. So
Classic.
the person who's the introvert, what they do, the difference is that it doesn't mean that they're not social. It doesn't mean that they're shy. It doesn't mean that they don't like people, although sometimes, but what it does mean is that they get their recharge internally. And what's very interesting is that having a one-on-one conversation, like it feels like we're having right now, even though there are other people here, is neither of us seem very shy or quiet, I think, right? But having a one-on-one conversation, there's a lot of internal thinking that goes on. So it's not like if you're teaching a classroom or speaking in front of a crowd, that is completely external energy, right? Because you're kind of
Right.
focusing on the group around you, and there's just a lot of people. But when you're having a one-on-one, you're thinking, you're reflecting, hearing what they're saying. So it's actually internal. So introverted salespeople actually go much deeper and they do better in one-on-one meetings, right? They can do group presentations, but I think that while the while the extrovert connects to more people, like surface, and this isn't a rule, but in a general way, the introvert is more like one person at a time, but goes much deeper. And if you had a good conversation with an introvert, that's the end of it. You already sold them just by that human connection. And it's like, it's so powerful to have that personality and know where and how to use it.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, I had an extroverted, created personality, I'll say, and I lived in that for years until I did some really deep work and realized that, like, I mean, I started off more introverted, and it took a long time for me to come back to like the real me because of like different things that had come on. Why I created that personality. I'd rather sit in my office by myself with nobody around. And that's the least extroverted thing I can say. And it took me a while to realize that that's what I was experiencing. But when you're an introvert, and I think it's important for people to realize, like, I had made a post of like 5 things that are very unique to introverts that make them top salespeople without them even realizing it. The fact their listening skills are top notch because they pay attention to details, and therefore they're able to help their clients in a much deeper way because they understand their needs and wants. Their thoughtfulness, their preparation, their, building deep connections, the fact that they're persistent, like all of these things are things that introverts have that many extroverts, because they're moving fast and they're trying to, get all those different points and be in the crowd, they don't hit those pieces. And they have to work so much harder to pay attention to those little pieces where I'll have conversations with people and I'll mention something to them months later. And it's the smallest detail. And I'm like, oh, hey, by the way, how's that course you're taking? Or how's your daughter feeling? And they're like, how do you even remember that? And it's because I pay attention to the little details. It's just part of my personality. It's an automatic for me. And yeah, I also make sure to take good notes. But even without that, like most of my information with my people that I've spoken to, my clients and my connections, they're in my head because I remember those details because it's part of that, I don't know if it's the neural pathways. I don't know if exactly what the science is behind it, but I connect with people on that level. And it's just fascinating to me how people think you need to be outgoing in order to sell. And in reality, there are so many places where being introverted will do so much more for you than being that extroverted personality.
Couldn't agree more. And it's fascinating that what you're saying about like your trajectory from like early childhood to probably like teenage, young adulthood to, like kind of like feeling like settling into yourself. I think that's super common in Western culture. Extroverts are prized. And if you're not one, you better pretend to be one if you want to be socially accepted. So like, I find that a lot of people, myself included, like during like high school years, like you better not like just, be an introvert and spend every afternoon reading a book because you will not be part of like the group if you do that. And then I think it takes like until you get to like your, young adult or like when you realize like that social group like really doesn't matter to you and doesn't make you happy. And
Right.
like, but I think it's like very understandable why people do that, especially if you have extroverted parents, which is going to be probably more than 50% of the time. Your parents are going to be like, oh, go play with friends. Why are you sitting at home? Is something wrong? So like we live in a society where like if you're alone, like, oh, are you sick? Can I help you? What's wrong?
So true. Yeah, I grew up that way. I grew up this introverted kid and I was shy. I was short growing up and like I was very sensitive. And only when I was in high school, the end of my high school years, did I create this extroverted personality because I had to. I wouldn't have survived otherwise in a social forum without that. And I don't know, when I was maybe 30 something, did I embrace my introvertedness and realize I don't like to be an extrovert in that way. Like I love meeting people because I'm genuinely curious about them. But that's my introverted side of me, not the extroverted side. Right. So I don't mind going to a networking event because I appreciate meeting people and I'm curious about individuals and their stories. And I use that to make me more comfortable in that setting. But I don't like crowds. I don't like being around a lot of people all at once. It makes me very uncomfortable. And it took me a really long time to figure that out because it's so like weird to a certain degree. You're like, I'm Mr. Extroverted, Mr. Salesperson. Like, I've been doing this for so long, and like it takes a while to like wake up to the reality that like this isn't really working anymore. I'm really unhappy and I don't know why until like you do this deep work and you're like, oh, that's why. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I want to point out that if you think back and I don't know if this is something to do like on the spot. It takes a little bit of like, just thinking and trying to remember. But if you think back to the time that you acted extroverted and you took on that persona, my guess is, and I could say the same for myself, is that you actually ended up spending a lot of time during recovery, right? Whether it's like staying up later at night just so that you get time when everyone else goes to sleep, or maybe like, like declining weekend invitations, or like there's usually some kind of like thermostat that you end up naturally like resetting. So maybe you get sick a lot, like something happens that your body like doesn't allow you to do that. So it compensates somehow because you're not really that. And if you're acting extroverted now, and you realize that you do that a lot, like that could be a clue. Maybe read about introversion, and then maybe that will explain why you're always so wiped out and exhausted, or like compensating in some way.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's one of the reasons I, quote unquote, like had this piece go a little longer is because I think that this is something that people assume they know right away. I'm an introvert, I'm an extrovert. And the reality is, it took even me a really long time to figure out what I really was. Because, like you said, I created this extroverted personality to fit in. And then only later on, and yeah, I got sick. And there were times when my system just couldn't take it anymore and I needed to just be alone. Only looking back now that you're saying that, did I realize that's what that was. That was that thermostat like kicking in automatically to just allow my brain to be okay with the fact that I was pretending to be an extrovert. Um, but it's something that I don't think most people pay attention to. And it's worth looking into it and realizing, like, filling out a, whether it's a questionnaire or just reading into it a little bit more and understanding like what are the real things that really bring you happiness. So many people are just unhappy and they don't even realize why. And that could be a very easy, piece. Not like, all of a sudden we're like, gurus letting everyone know, hey, maybe you're really an extrovert and that's why you're not happy. There could be other reasons, but it's definitely something that's worth looking into. Um, Moving on to another question that kind of stems right from here. A lot of people, because they're more introverted, feel that they don't want to sell. They'd rather just hire a salesperson right out of the gate as soon as they open their business. Is that a good idea, or should they be selling?
I'm sure you have a lot to say on this topic. I'll tell you what I like, my experience from my own business and from having coach clients who tried that and failed. So that's my answer in short. But I'll tell you why. No one, and this is hard for business owners to swallow. Nobody cares about your business more than you, nor should they, right? Like if they're just an employee, or even if it's
Oh yeah,
commission, even if well, yeah, like even
100%.
yeah, even if you give very high commissions, like this, when it grows into something huge, it's going to be your building. It's not going to be theirs, right? So there is nobody who's a better person, better candidate to be the top salesperson in your company than you. Now, the time to give it over is after you've maxed out so hard that you don't like, you have so many leads coming in that there isn't enough like time to keep up with them, to follow up with them, to nurture those leads, to service those leads. Okay, great. Then it's time, like it's when you have an overflow. Eventually, yes, you can move into CEO of the company and hire sales people once you've fed the company so much that you're feeding a whole team of people doing the work. But until you've brought in enough food to feed the business and to grow the business, like your job ain't over.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, one of the things that I've seen, especially in the creative space, which is where I hang out a lot, um, people who have creative agencies and freelancers, they try really hard to bring on salespeople. And ultimately, many times it just doesn't work. And there are many reasons for that. I mean, it's very hard for a regular classic salesperson to understand the nuances of marketing and of, all these, branding and all these different pieces within the creative space. But also, like you said, if you really don't know what to do, it's going to be really hard for you to manage someone to be a salesperson. And one of the things that I do for companies when they get to that level and they're ready to bring on a salesperson is lay the foundations together with them, because the way that you're going to sell is going to be completely different than the way that they're going to sell. And that's a really hard transition to make, right? You're not able to just, flip a switch. And the average salesperson isn't great at creating something from nothing. If there's no existing process and they're going to have to figure out who their ideal client profile is and how they're going to talk to them and what they're going to say to them, a lot of them will come up blank. And like 3 months later, you're frustrated, they're frustrated, you spent a lot of money and you didn't get anywhere. Right. And ultimately, so that's like one side of it. It's just like the practical side of you knowing how to, move this thing forward versus trying to give it over to someone else and hope that they're going to do a good job. But then, like you said, there's also the side that no one's going to sell it like you can. And even if you're okay with getting less sales, if you don't know what you're doing because you haven't taken the time to figure out how to talk to the people, who they are, where you're going to find them, what you need to say, and how you need to say it, they're not going to be able to do any better than that because they're going to be looking to you for that direction, saying, hey, this is your business. How'd you do this until then? You're like, yeah, it was just word of mouth. They're like, how am I supposed to work with that? Right? They have no clue what to do with it and they can't. Right? So there's like all these different moving pieces where you can try to bring someone on. Like you said, most people, they end up banging their heads against the wall and failing at it until they learn the skills necessary to get themselves to a place where they can be successful.
Yeah, you don't want to outsource, like, bringing home the basics. Like I just, and it's interesting because if you've ever picked up the phone, like had the unfortunate experience of being on the end of a scripted sales call, you know how bad it is and how unlikely it is for you to ever buy from them. And so you don't want someone following an exact script, but you want someone following the fundamentals of how we sell. Like for me, if I was teaching someone to sell for my business, it would be like, never give them information until you've heard about their problem, because we don't assume that we can help anybody, right? So like
Yeah.
there would be certain things that if you listen to 25 of my sales calls, then you would notice, and then I could point out patterns. And so there's certain like values that are embedded in my sales process that would need to be given over, and I would have need to do that hundreds of times to even know what they are.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like when I speak to people about the 6 steps of a discovery call, right? So there's an opener, then there's open ended questions, and only then do you tell people about you, right? That's exactly what you're doing. And the reason we do that is because so many people come into a call and they go, okay, so tell me about what it is that you do. Like, how can you help me? And you're like, you could tell them about it, but it's not going to mean anything to them because you're not talking to what their issues are. That's one issue with that, right? And even besides for that fact, how are you going to offer them anything if you have no idea what their problems are? Right. So I always say, look, I'd really love to talk about me, but what's going on with you? Like, why are we here on this call today? And it's just a matter of flipping that script and taking control of the conversation. Because if you really want to help people and it's not being manipulative or ethically persuading people, whatever that means, if you want to really help people and serve them, you need to know what's going on their side of the phone, their side of the screen, in order for you to do that. So you first need to get some basic questions in to understand what's going on with them. And only then can you even have the audacity, quote unquote, to try to help them. Right. So it's
Exactly.
just simple, paying attention to those things. Let's move into coaching for a second, because I think this is something that so many people are unsure about when it comes to the selling process, how to sell as a coach, right? So the first question I think so many people come into is how much free time should they give at an initial call?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big one. Okay. So I give 15 minutes. I found that to be like just the right amount. I actually schedule like a couple times a week. Like once I took my business seriously and like I made a process, I figured out, okay, well, how many sales conversations do I need to have to be able to get the amount of clients that I want, and what percentage of those do I think I'll end up taking on? And and then also, so I like them batch, like back to back. So I don't recommend this for most people, but unless you're like ADD, then you should certainly do this. But but I do 1 hour the mornings that I take calls, 4 15-minute back-to-back conversations. While I'm doing it, I have my app open, where I'm taking notes about what's going on, and I leave a note by the end. By minute 15, I'm leaving a note what I want my assistant to do. So by the time I'm done, if I've done it all correctly, then my assistant knows what to do to follow up with them, and I don't forget what happens, because for years I didn't take notes and didn't have any system, and then just picked up the phone whenever and answered messages all times of night and day. So once I figured out that system, which I don't think you were around doing sales coaching. I had to do it all by myself.
Ari,
Yeah, right.
it's a
So
process.
Yeah, no, you have to have gone through the steps. Like for the people who I'm training now to do career coaching, like we offer an entrepreneur track that we're actually just starting this evening. And part of what we're doing, I'm like, all the things it took me 5 years to learn, for the first 5 years I struggled with, like I'm giving you in a like package with the bow. So like how to run these calls is important. Um, Probably it's recommended for most people to leave a 15-minute buffer because sometimes with your ideal client, you have a little bit of a longer conversation. You want to get to the crux of the issue. You also want to give yourself a buffer to write notes, send a follow-up email if you don't have someone else who's going to be doing that for you. I think that like anyone who I've ever hired, like a one-to-one, like coaching, therapy, someone who you're going to be hiring and working with directly. Like I've toyed with the idea of like, do I need to offer? Could I just sell straight from my website? And the answer always is like, no, they're hiring you for you. And if you don't get that personal connection, now, of course, there are referrals and I make it possible that people can just book directly on my website. And sometimes that happens, but most people are going to want to connect with me and that's valid. I want to connect with them also. I also want to vet them. And lots of times, I think the better you get, the more likely you are to turn people away if they're not a good fit, refer them on. So I would say not more than 30 minutes. If you're giving 30 minutes, you're giving away a session. And unless you decide you want to give a free session, like a free consult, which you should do at the beginning, and you should do until you're busy. And then once you're busy, I would say 15, 20 minutes is the most.
Yeah, so I myself, I actually do a free 30-minute strategy call. And that's because my three passions are sales, teaching, and helping people. So I like to have a little bit of space where I can just give people time to help them, figure out what they need to do, what their next move, even if they're not going to become a client of mine. And ultimately, what I came to notice is 30 minutes is a really sweet spot for pretty much most people to have a really clear understanding where by the end of the call, they're okay, so what does it look like to work with you? Because if it makes sense, they're going to ask you. Right. So a lot of times that'll end up happening. I'm like, oh, that wasn't the point of this call, but sure, I'm happy to talk about it. And there have been times where it was much more in depth. And I had one call that I'll never forget. I literally opened the door for this guy and he went on for 25 minutes just talking the whole time. I scheduled another call because he had a really ridiculous story. But most of the time it's not necessary. Like there's no reason to, unless you specifically like to give back. And I like to give back to the community. So I do that. But unless that's part of your model, like you said, keep it to a minimum. And even now with myself, I'm going to very quickly be changing that model just because I don't have the time to be able to continuously offer so much time to people. Like it's only a matter of time till I'm going to have to even bring that down because you can't run a business like that. You're losing too much time at a certain point unless you're a couple of hours a week, which is, I'm limiting it now, I think, to almost like half an hour, maybe an hour, 2-3 times a week at most. Which kind of brings us into the next question, which is, should people offer an initial free consultation or a call?
Yeah, so I was gonna say, like, I think that a big difference of like, say what I do and what you do is the length of time that you're gonna engage with the person's services, right?
Right.
So for the 15-minute call, you're gonna be working with me just a couple of times. This is not gonna be like a 6-month like retainer, right? So I do think that if you're gonna hire someone who you're gonna work with for 3 months, 6 months, a year, sure, like a free consultation, once you vetted them, that they're the ideal client, right? Like maybe. Personally, I've never done that because I felt like, especially when I started, I was doing like people were engaging me for a one-time thing. They were taking an aptitude test and we're having one session. So like that's the thing that you're paying me for, right? Like that's the
Exactly.
service, but I think that if someone's going to be working together for months, like a free consult is great until you're so booked that you don't have the time for them. And that's when you stop offering it. I will say that in my 15-minute calls, my goal is, like you said, like to try to give some advice and help them. But I've done it enough times that I kind of pace myself, like the first 5 minutes, this, and like when we're getting to the last 5 minutes, like, okay, did we get to any solutions? Did we get to whatever? Like I remind myself, like, okay, like I need to make a suggestion as we're getting, as we're getting toward the end of it or not, and figure out what the right way to end the call is.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as time goes on, and I've noticed with my own clients, you get better and better at following the process that will serve you best. Right. I myself, I mean, I work with people for a minimum of 6 months at this point, pretty much, unless it's something very specific. So the half an hour in, relevance to the rest of the time I'm going to be working with them, either I'm just going to help them or I'm going to need at least that to be able to move them through that process, right? Most people, it's not a one call close. It happens every once in a while, but for the most part, there's going to be follow ups and there's going to be more questions. And I might even end up on another call with them, depending on what's going on. But every single person needs to realize what is it that you're doing, especially within the coaching space. How much time are you being engaged with them, and what makes sense for a process for you in order to be able to move people into becoming a client of yours so you can serve and help them. And I think for each person, it could be different. There's going to definitely be overlap when it comes to these types of things. So I definitely do believe in the model because I've been using it since day one. But at the same time, like you said, it really depends on what you're doing. If the whole entire structure is that you're giving them advice on a one call or 3 calls, then no, it doesn't really make sense for you to offer them a half an hour or an hour session because you're giving them everything that you would be offering them after the fact, and they don't really need your services anymore. And then what are they paying you for?
Well, right. Well, also like the way my system works is like until you do aptitude testing, if it's a career choice kind of client, which is,
Right.
one of the categories that I work in. But yes, the people who are going to be, doing 6 sessions, those are the people that I find I give them a minimum of a half hour because we need to get through. The point of the call is to get through what's the problem exactly. And the more complex the situation is, the longer it's going to take to really understand and unpack what the problem is. And then do I have a solution that could be useful to you?
Right, 100%. And I think that, another question that comes up with this is when you're trying to coach people, or even when you're, a business owner or a freelancer, right, this applies. How do you keep to a schedule when trying to sell? I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with. I know I have my 2 cents on this, but I definitely want to hear yours.
So, well, explain to me a little bit what you mean, meaning like further than the like, here's my 15-minute blocks once a day. What do you mean by that?
So even beyond that, right? So there's going to be the times when, you're coaching people or when you're working on projects. There's going to be the time that you're potentially having sales calls, all these different moving parts to running any type of business as a business owner, a coach, or a freelancer. So many people struggle with this idea of keeping to a schedule if they're also going to need to add selling into the mixture, right? They know, okay, I know how to do my work. I know it's going to take me X amount of time. But then as soon as they try to start selling, they get completely thrown off.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was lucky enough to have a mentor when I just got started who I had like a full training on how to do this, Jacob Engel. And he recommended it was actually when I was taking a break from working, but I couldn't really take a break, like, because I just was so bored. So like I needed some mental stimulation. So I worked for someone who I knew. It was like a commission job. I was like, oh, sure, that sounds like fun. He was like, oh, come, we're doing a sales training by this guy. I had no idea who he was. So he was giving a Sandler sales training. He was trained, right? So I got this concept and I didn't even realize that, like, I had spoke to him again when I started coaching, that it was so ingrained in me because I had that concept that it came naturally at that point, that when you finally come up with your offer, it's very easy if you've done all the right steps before that. Right. So like
Yeah.
if you've started by, people get on the phone and they go, hi, how much do you charge? Right. Are you available? Like technical questions. What do you do? And I used to get, like, I guess a little more stuck on it than I do now, but it's like right away, it's like, I have no idea if I could help you. I could give you a list of all the things I do and all the services I have, but that's going to be really boring, right? Like you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a lot for people. I mean, ultimately, when it comes to juggling all the different pieces that people need to do as a business owner, a coach, or a freelancer, one of the things that I've seen works tremendously is a combination of compartmentalization and time blocking. Right? A lot of people try time blocking, but they a lot of times fail at it. And I think one of the reasons is because if you don't have compartmentalization linked together with it, and that's the idea that you have boxes in your head for every single little thing that you have to do. And when you're able to map out what are the things I need to do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and then have space for that in your time blocking, and you're removing all the things from the front of your head into the back where it belongs, then you're actually able to stop when you're supposed to and focus on the next thing. And I think that's one of the big things that a lot of people struggle with when they go into, any of these spaces, because they're not used to that. They're used to just doing one thing. When you're working for someone else, you just do what you're good at. You just do your job and you have to pay attention to anything else. And it's this big shift.
Yeah, I want to say also, like, noticing your circadian rhythm, right? Like, is really important. So if you're a morning person, if you're an afternoon person, like, where do you have like your peak productivity, especially as an introvert? Like, if I did sales calls in the afternoon, I would sound like this, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just like wouldn't be there. So like for me, recognizing, I actually had to play with that a little bit. Like, I was like, oh, I'll just do it at the end of the day when I'm done. It's just like a quick little thing on it. I realized like I had no patience for it at the end of the day. But first thing in the morning, it was like invigorating. It was like, oh, I'm like so pumped to talk about, what you need and help you and come up with solutions together. And then I also found that it helped me start off my day, because like if I have a call with someone, like if you're just scheduled to like do a bunch of work yourself, right, it's very hard to like get started. But I know that if I have a call with someone or a few people, and then like I get like so in the zone, it also gives me like a lot of content, like, right, like if I have like 4 conversations first thing in the morning, then like my brain is like swimming with ideas or stories when I'm done. So like I found that the morning works, and I'm a morning person. I've always been. I think that people should work with that as much as possible, depending on their time zone and availability and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, because ultimately, it's kind of the same idea when you work in your zone of genius, when you work in your circadian rhythms, when you work in the way that your systems need to work, you're working in tangent with it as opposed to working against it. And it's very, very hard. You're constantly draining yourself if you're not doing that. And you're just pushing against yourself. And it's just going to make it harder for you to do everything that you want to do. Um, and it's a shame. One of the things I think that you're going to be excited about, one of the questions when it comes to personality types, is objections. How do you deal with objections based on your personality type?
Ooh, okay. So before I bore everyone with charts and graphs and all different specifics, I guess like we'll do like the basic. I think that there's two general parts of personality, and I'll give two general frameworks. So there's the people who are like the more in their head, like the logical, right? People who consider themselves more intellectual, people who like to use their brain, and like that's the most important thing to them. So those people love arguing. They love debates. They could take one side of a debate and then switch sides and win for either side, depending which team they're on, right? So like it's not even like it's right or wrong. Like they just like love logic. So those people, you hand them an objection. You tell them, oh, nobody's succeeded in this position before, and their reaction isn't like, oh, well, it's not going to be me. Is like, well, watch me, I'm going to do that, right? So like those people are like, they love objection and actually gets them fired up, right? And then if you know yourself and you know you're that type, then great, then you actually have no problem with objections. There's also other things that come into it, like your problem solving, like how analytical are you, how likely are you to think of questions in advance, which actually we find that the more complex your problem solving is, the worse salesperson you are, because you usually think of way more objections than the people do. So you get like so much anxiety and fear and planning that never actually happens if you're like so smart. You have to kind of like tone down and then like realize that most people aren't that way. And then the people who are more like emotional, like the same people who rejection hurts them, and they get like afraid to argue with people, and they just want everyone to be happy. So the way that like they deal with objections is and should be really different. They're not like, oh, like it doesn't have this feature, well, here's the reason why it's more important, right? So like they're like, they always want to get along with people, so they should, when someone brings an objection to them, they should say, like, they should be therapist, right? Like, because that's who they naturally are, right? They don't want to go into fighting mode or like defense position. They want to go into like, yeah, like I get that. Like, is that something that's really important to you? Like, I wonder if we could find a way to make that work in our system. Like, do what's naturally you, and then
Right.
you're not going to feel like you're pretending, and you can't succeed at doing the opposite. It just never works.
Yeah, and I think that, when it comes to this topic in general, so many people, they know themselves, and therefore they just know, okay, I sell like this, or I just talk to people like this. In reality, you can work with other personality types. It takes some time to, learn who's analytical and how to pick up the cues for those different pieces. But once you do, it's just going to help you to help those people so much more than if you just stick to one way. I mean, we could go into the different ways, an objection handling itself, but, just sticking to the idea of, based on personality, I think that you really just, hit it a home run on this one, in the sense that, like, as you did with all the other questions, in the sense that you need to be willing to be open to the idea that the way that you're naturally like to answer questions isn't necessarily going to be the best way for the person you're talking to.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. You have to, right. It's like kind of, I think when we speak to someone with a different accent, I don't know if everyone does this, but you know how you hear people like switch a little bit? Like as humans, we're very good at picking up on what the other person is and needs. Even when you speak to somebody who speaks very loud or very quiet, you find yourself modulating, hopefully, if you're in tune with other people, like similarly.
Mirroring.
So right, right. So I feel like if someone comes off very aggressive, right, like you don't want to shrink into your corner. You don't need to be equally aggressive, but like know who you're dealing with and know how to handle them and what's going to make them feel comfortable.
100%. Before we go to Q&A, when do you think, and you kind of touched on this a little earlier, but just to flush it out, when can or should someone hire a salesperson, and who makes the best salesperson? We touched on both of these a little earlier, but just to flush it out 100%, I wanted to ask that question right before we go into Q&A.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough because like I've had people who were my assistants who I think like, oh, like they could just pick up the phone and sell for me, and they usually can, right? And like I don't try it. I just like realize like, they wouldn't necessarily be able to have that conversation. They're really good at this thing. I think that two things that you want to look for in a salesperson, or it depending on what you're selling, right? Like there's like the logical people and the emotional people. I think it makes a very big difference. The emotional people are gonna be more passionate, but they're also gonna have a harder time with rejection. So that's one thing. But I do think it's important if you have a person who's a really good administrative assistant, they're very organized, scheduled, structured. Sales isn't usually like that. So I would say that you want the person who maybe shows up a little late, but they get the job done. Like, that would be the kind of person. And then I guess like when to do it is like when you have so many sales that you can't do anymore yourself.
Yeah, I would agree. Like a lot of people, they want to just have a salesperson come in and just save the world. But that's not the reality, right? It's going to take time. It's going to take, time for you to learn how they work, for them to learn how you work, and, the style that you go through things. And, there's different, like you said, people who are more organized, less organized. I happen to be very organized myself. I work on my spontaneity in order to like, okay, let's be spontaneous right now. But it's a challenge. Like I have to force myself to do that just to, be that way. But I find that when it comes to, being a good salesperson, there is a lot of discipline that comes along with it. Knowing when you need to do certain actions, making sure that you're putting things into CRM so that you can keep on top of your notes and all these different types of things. But like you said, when you no longer can handle it yourself, or when you have to take the business to the next level, you need to start working on your business as opposed to in the business, it starts to make sense to bring on a salesperson. And a lot of times it's someone who's going to be different than your personality type, as opposed to sticking with someone who's just like you.
Yeah, I tell people this sometimes, like hire someone who you don't really like. And I don't mean it like literally, but in a way it's like don't hire someone who's exactly your best friend, who's exactly like you, because they're not, you don't necessarily want to clone. You want someone who can do things a little differently.
Yeah, and someone who's going to fill the things that you're not necessarily as good at. Okay, awesome. Let's jump into the comments over here. We have a bunch of questions already. We have someone here. What does the average career coach charge a client?
Good question. So I would say that if you're like an average rate is, I believe 2% of your salary. So if you make 100,000, sorry, no, I think that was 3%. If you make $100,000, you're probably going to spend about $3,000 for like the once every few years that you engage a career coach. Now that's like just a general number. If you Google, you'll get the rates of like Rockport certified career coaches. We actually recommend, for the one-time session, it starts at $575, and people who are just getting trained and practicing can do it for as little as they want, or free for family members. Besides for their cost. But typically career coaching, I would say like between 500 and 5,000 is really standard.
Amazing. I'm definitely not even going to try to answer this question because I have no clue. A lot of coaches, someone pointed out here, have offered free calls. This is based on just something that we mentioned earlier, and they all have always walked away with something they can take home. even though they don't make it clear beforehand. They make it clear beforehand that they're not looking to hire at all. So that's definitely something that it seems is more across the board. Um, but one of the questions that I saw here earlier, let me see if I can just find it
Well,
now.
I'll say to that point, while you're looking for it, is that it's funny. The first time that I realized, like, oh, I need to have a system, so I made a calendar with slots for these phone calls, and then I just sent it out to like a general list, and I didn't put any disclaimer like you have to hire me. It was just like free calls available, and so it filled up like instantly, like 25 free calls. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm blocking off the rest of my calendar. Like, I'm going to spend the rest of my next 2 weeks taking these free calls. Cause like I wasn't at this 15-minute system yet. So it was like, I knew it was
Right.
going to take me more time. So not one of them became clients. And then I realized that I need to have a caveat. And I actually posed this question on LinkedIn, and a lot of people gave good advice. You possibly were one of them. And people said, like, put like a disclaimer that people have to check, put a little checkbox, like, I understand services cost this much, and if I decide to engage. Now, like, people, I actually get a lot of times people ask me, oh, like, if I can't afford that, like they'll go schedule a call, and then they'll message me, oh, I didn't schedule a call because that's not in my budget. And they'll say, oh, don't worry, just check the checkbox. Like, I'm happy to give you the time anyways. But like, that's a small percentage of people. And you kind of have to have some kind of system that makes people aware that this is the way that I sell. I will never take your time just to push my service. I'll spend 95% of our conversation trying to help you. But this is a sales call. You have to understand that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that one of the, again, people are different in the sense of like, what is the purpose of those calls? Right. So if you're doing it because you just like to help people, right? So myself as a great example, my free strategy calls are literally that. There's no strings attached. I just like to do it. They get picked up quickly, and I don't usually have that much space. But I'm not necessarily using those in order to fuel my business, right? I'm doing all
Right.
the other things that I need to do in order to do so. Now, a lot of times that does end up becoming a client call, but many times it's just giving back to the community because that's something that I appreciate doing, and it's something that people have done for me, and I like to pass it forward. But if you're looking to take someone's time, at least be cognizant of the fact that that's what you're doing, right? I found so many people, they're so they push back on themselves so much. They're like, oh no, I can't possibly speak to you on WhatsApp even though you're offering me that, because I don't want to take your time, right? Some people go just the opposite extreme in the idea that I can't take any of your time. And even the idea of booking some time on someone's calendar, if there's that checkbox, most people aren't even going to reach out, right? Because I'm not really planning
No,
on using
100%.
your
It turns away
services.
a large percentage of people. And more recently, like in the last 2 years, when I've been really busy and I didn't necessarily need all those calls to keep my calendar busy, I've considered removing it. And for the same reason that you're saying, I'm like, it's so gratifying, those people who I could help in 15 minutes. Then I'm like, I don't think you need my help. Like, that happens a couple times a week. And I'm like, I don't think you need my help. Here's what you should do. Here's a course that you can take. Here's a person I can put you in touch with. And like,
Right.
I love that part of my day. So like, I don't want to give that up, and it's fun where you get to do that.
Yeah, 100%. And like even myself, like when I speak to my own clients, one of the biggest ways that you can be of service is to tell somebody that they don't need you, they need someone else, right?
Yes,
Because
yes.
ultimately that's really what we're here for. We're not here to get another client or to get another sale. We're really here to serve people and to help them. That's what we do, right? And if we can, be in congruence with that idea, then we'll be able to serve people in a much better way. I always like to point out as we end the podcast, I never ended up finding that question, that there's a lot of information, coming out of this podcast. As an example, there was so much value and impactful pieces of information that we learned. Take one thing that you're going to try to put into implementation, just one. If you try to do everything, you're not going to get anywhere. And it's all going to just flop. So take one thing that you're going to take away from today, and you're going to start putting it into implementation. I know that when we spoke right before the call, you said, Ms. Karen, that you had an offer that you wanted to mention to people here or listening. So I'll pass it back to you for that.
Sure. I mean, anyone who wants, any career help or has a relative, especially this time of year with, like, we have a lot of young, like, parents reaching out for young graduates. So really, if they want help with whether it's choosing a career the first time, choosing it right the first time, or you need help or you have a question in your career, even I have a lot of clients who I'll help specifically within their career. Like you don't have a question about what you should do, but maybe how you can do it better, how you can progress in your company or in your freelance business or whatever. So reach out on LinkedIn, and I'm glad to help. And I've just trained a group of 25 career coaches who, if I'm not available or I don't live in your area or offer your level of expertise, or you're looking for someone more affordable, we have like a matching system where I can put you in touch with someone who I think would be able to be a good fit. So you could just send a message on LinkedIn, and me or someone on my team will do our best to help you out.
Amazing. I've put Ms. Karen's information in the chat for anybody who wants it there. I've also put my own information, my Calendly, as well as my WhatsApp, because if you do have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. In this live podcast, we speak a lot about things that are timely, interesting, that you can add to your skill set toolbox. And if you love the live podcast, you can feel free to hit me up if you want to take your game to the next level, or if you really just have some questions that maybe you weren't comfortable putting on the chat or you want to learn more about. Slots do go quickly, so don't be too tardy on that. And I wish everyone a fantastic rest of their day. Thank you again, Ms. Karen, for joining us. This was absolutely fantastic. I had a great time myself, and I'm looking forward to seeing everyone next week.
Same. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.